Christy Nault is here. You and I were just talking before the podcast. I love all of the topics we're going to discuss today. And my listeners have heard me cover a little bit about the psilocybin stuff, a lot about looking into root causes and using our bodies as our own best healer. And you have so much experience in all of these areas. You've made a career out of it. And I want to always tell the listeners kind of why you've put so much energy into things. Like, I love that we always talk about people's success stories, but I like to go back in and go, okay, what was the catalyst to bring you to this place? Why is this so important to you? What is the big driver here? And I know you have a lot of stories that got you to this place. So
Absolutely.
let's go back first. Well, first of all, welcome. Hello.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Kelly. Excited to be here and to connect with you today.
I'm so happy you're here. And I want to go back because we were just talking about this before. You brought up the vaccine issue. This
Mhm.
is not political for any of the listeners. This is not a political podcast. You guys know I really try to steer clear of those conversations, but this is your life experience. And so,
Mhm.
will you start by just telling us a little bit about your story, your family's story? And I know your brother specifically had some things come up around a vaccine that has now
Mhm.
led you down this journey, or maybe was the starting point of this journey for you. So let's go back and will you tell the listeners and myself a little bit about your story?
Yes, so happy to share. I have been working in the women's healing space for over 15 years, but the catalyst was really when I was 3 years old. So I can't really share the story without rewinding all the way back. I feel like the beginning of my story is quite different than a lot of other practitioners. A lot of other practitioners get into this line of work because they were really ill as children. And it wasn't me who was sick as a child, it was my brother, and for me, I was the witness of that. And I've always been immersed in like hospital settings and just, I've seen what doesn't work. And I always had this burning desire to learn more. And I've been doing that forever and ever. So essentially, I am one of three children. I'm the middle child. My brother was 4 years older than me, and my parents describe him as truly the perfect first child ever. He was born incredibly healthy. He was so athletic, so charming and charismatic, and just incredible. They had 7 really amazing years with him. And he went in for a well check visit at 7 years old, just got your routine vaccines, and he was severely vaccine injured that day. Um, Beginning a couple hours after the appointment, he started having grand mal seizures. And this led to the worst case of epilepsy that doctors had ever witnessed at that point in time. That was in the early 90s. So he was having 350 grand mal seizures every single day. It was
Wow.
really, really wild. Yeah. I was only 3 years old at this time. So this is just all I truly remember. He had over 13 brain surgeries. By the time he was in middle school, had over half of his brain removed, and none of that worked. He was on dozens of medications that created so many other issues. You know, one of the medications that he was on has now been pulled off the shelves, has a black box warning for young boys. It creates violent behavioral outbursts. And that was part of my story too. So for me, home didn't really feel safe. There was a lot of, behavioral issues with my brother. Wasn't his fault whatsoever. And my form of coping and control and survival as a child was to just be as perfect as possible so my parents did not have to worry about me whatsoever. And that really debilitating, suffocating perfectionism is what shaped the blueprint of my nervous system and carried me through the rest of my life, and then ended up leading into my own story with chronic illness. And it wasn't, for me, a history of being on a ton of antibiotics as a kid like other people. I wasn't on any. I was a thriving athlete, straight A student, just being as perfect and great as I could. I was really interested in health from a young age, but I did struggle a lot with eating disorders, really intense anorexia by the time I was in middle school, because again, that was my form of trying to find control in a very out of control situation. So there's a lot that happened within all of those years. My mom was just an incredibly fierce advocate for my brother. This was, again, the 90s. We didn't have the internet. Even chiropractic care back then was considered a little woo. So she would go to the library and research as much as she possibly could and present this information to my brother's doctors. And there was just a lot of medical gaslighting. My brother was medically kidnapped from our family at one point. And a big part of my story, this actually this light bulb moment just happened recently when I was being interviewed on a podcast. But essentially, my mom presented some information to my brother's doctors, and they just said, "You know what, lady? You're too well researched. You know too much. This is a little weird. This isn't right for people to like know this much." They in turn diagnosed my mom with Munchausen by proxy syndrome, which is basically saying you're making this up about your child. Took my brother off all his meds cold turkey that day. He seized for 72 hours straight. And it was just so traumatic. I don't have many memories under the age of like 25 years old. I kind of blocked all of that stuff out, although it is coming back with the psilocybin work. But that's one memory I do have is watching my brother seize for 3 days straight. And I think that that moment of witnessing my mom be so confident in this new information she had presented to a team of doctors get shut down and our family getting punished so severely for my mom using her voice also was a big factor in me being so afraid to use my voice
Mm,
for so long. And I think so many women can relate to that. And the reason I'm sharing that is because I've done all the things. We'll talk about the root cause healing, we'll talk about the microdosing, but even in the times when I was, had the perfect diet, all of the detoxes and supplements on board, and like I was still struggling. And it was actually using microdosing to dissolve those fear barriers to find my authentic voice again that I feel like has been so healing for me on my journey. And just being able to speak in front of thousands of women and connect with you and other audiences on podcasts. And I feel like health is truly multidimensional. There are the physiological aspects, the emotional, the spiritual, and like I'm kind of making these dots of the ancestral connection that I'm healing in real time. Like my mom was punished for using her voice, and I'm kind of healing it for my family right now by sharing our story. So that's just kind of a fun thing we can get into. But essentially, my brother did end up passing away. He was 30 years old. And it was rough. Obviously, it was a trauma for me, and that is what really initiated my journey with chronic illness. I was struggling with gut issues. I was struggling with hormone issues prior to that. But the shock and the trauma of the death, it was like within a couple weeks, I had an endometriosis diagnosis, chronic Lyme disease, mast cell activation syndrome, autoimmunity. I mean, the list was a mile long. And that was my wake-up call. I had a massive spiritual awakening when my brother passed away. As crazy as it is, I'm grateful for it all because I do understand the soul contract we made with each other, and he really did give up his life so I could wake up and share this messaging with so many people. But it made me think because I had been, working with women already. I started off as a personal trainer in college, got into health coaching, got into the root cause space, and just witnessing what my body went through after my brother's death was like, all right, we need to go so much deeper with all of these women who are quote unquote doing all the right things that are still struggling because so much of our issues are trauma based and chronic nervous system dysregulation, and we are multidimensional beings, so we really have to address the multidimensional root causes to get to a level of health that we all desire. So I'll kind of stop it there, and we can pick apart anywhere you want to go from here.
yeah, I mean, there's so many questions I have from all of that, but I think one of the main points that you're making is something that I love talking about as well, or that's really important to me, and that's I think what we're seeing on a bigger scale in our world right now is we do tend to make a lot of conversations political, and I think it's easy for either side to kind of blame the other side or whatever. But as a whole, what I'm noticing is we can't always maybe put our faith into these big systems that I think we've been programmed to believe in from our generation and before us. I think we've kind of led with like blind faith. And this
Mhm.
goes, I'm talking mostly about the medical field. And I think we're seeing a lot of like, hey, wait, we got to start advocating for ourselves. We've got to start paying attention to what we're putting in our bodies. We've got to start paying attention to not just throwing a pill at something, like, why is something happening? And those conversations seem to be happening a lot more. Vaccines are obviously part of that. And I think that to me is a journey that everyone should go on with themselves and see how your body reacts and things like that. I would like to ask you, just because I don't know the answer to this, when you say vaccine injury, what does that entail? What happened? What did
Mhm.
that look like other than the seizures? why would that happen to him specifically? Like, do you have any of those kinda answers?
Well, it's very clear that not everyone who gets vaccinated has extreme reactions like my brother. And that's why I think that it's hard for people to grasp. They're like, I was vaccinated as a kid, or my children were vaccinated and that didn't happen to my kids. So obviously, like your story is just a fluke. But that's really not true. As a society, we have quite literally normalized things like childhood obesity, autism, type 1 diabetes, food allergies, like eczema. We just think those things are normal. And vaccines are by no means the whole picture of why we're dealing with a chronically ill society. It's our food system, it's our farming practices, it's our water, it's the fact that family systems have become disconnected. And there's so many factors. So it's absolutely not one thing. But, vaccine companies have become, you can't sue vaccine companies because they convince the government that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. So this is coming from vaccine manufacturers themselves. And there are a lot of toxicities and really heavy loads of things like heavy metals that contribute to our toxin load. And, there are obviously other things that contribute to our toxin load as well. I don't have the answer for you as to, why that happened to my brother. I really don't know. There could be underlying genetic imprints that make some people more susceptible to different things. It could be so many things. But yeah, for him, it was just basically he went into this appointment as a vibrant, incredibly healthy, smart, athletic child, and he changed overnight. And I have, witnessed this with so many people. But like I said, it doesn't always look like that. Like, sickness looks like a lot of things that unfortunately we've normalized. So, a big phrase I say a lot in my work is common is not normal. Even with things like, as women, I think a lot of us have been conditioned to believe like bloating and PMS and cramps when we get our period. Like, we just think those things are
Mhm.
normal because so many people experience them, but common is not normal. And there genuinely are reasons as to why these different physical manifestation of issues do present.
Well, you've also touched on the fact that you got put on a lot of medicine, and then you would be having symptoms from that medicine, or maybe it was your brother that you mentioned
Yes,
that
my
with,
brother.
sorry.
Mhm.
And I that's a big thing that I always talk about is, like, we never look at where things are coming from or treat that, we just treat the symptom, but
Mhm.
then that creates other symptoms, and I'm like, "Is that can't" I do believe
Mhm.
in Western medicine for a lot of things, and I believe that it works best when it's combined with, like, the Eastern approach and looking at root causes. So, I know you mentioned a bunch of things that came up for you after your brother passed, and then as I read your story, I noticed that all of those things became alleviated with the work that you were doing on yourself and looking at the root cause. So, can you talk through that a little bit? Like, how did you figure out that your body was its own best healer? And then how did you work to find what the root causes actually were?
Yes, beautiful. I think one thing I want to mention when we're talking about root cause is it's never one root cause. So
Right.
people find me on Instagram and they're like, oh, this is so cool. This makes a lot of sense. Root cause healing. And then I'll get like 100 DMs a day, like, Chrissy, what's the root cause of eczema? Like there's like this chart that I can just tell you. And
Yeah.
that's really not it. We are mostly all dealing with issues around depletion, dysregulation, and toxicity as women, especially, those of us who grew up in the 90s, we were conditioned to believe that being tiny was synonymous with healthy. A lot of us grew up in like the fat free, low calorie
Mm.
craze, and we never saw food as medicine. We were conditioned to fear food and restrict as much as possible. And we grew up where the media was telling us, like, Jessica Simpson and Britney Spears were really fat. And like, there was actually no true information about our health. We thought like, the epitome of health with eating 1,200 calories a day, which is literally the amount a 2-year-old toddler needs, like bare minimally, not a woman who is capable of reproducing another human being. So, when it comes to root cause healing, it actually can be quite simple. I have my own proprietary order of operations framework that I feel like is so incredibly important to acknowledge because when a lot of people start realizing that Western medicine isn't probably the best for chronic solutions. Western medicine is amazing for emergency cases, right? If you get in a car accident, if like something really severe happens in an emergency situation, Western medicine is such a gift. But when it comes to any like dis-ease, those are lifestyle based issues that have accumulated over the course of years, if not decades. And it's going to require us to take a shift within our lifestyle. So, for a lot of health conscious women, I find that they start to disconnect from the Western medicine model, maybe explore like functional medicine. But unfortunately, I also believe that functional medicine has become kind of an exact replica of
Mhm,
Western medicine, just replacing pharmaceuticals with supplements. And like
mhm,
supplements can be great, but it's not addressing the reasons as to why we became sick in the first place, right? So these foundations that I speak of, like when we're talking about root causes, again, I said depletion, toxicity issues, dysregulation, that's where we need to start. So it is starting by addressing our nourishment and realizing that like juice cleanses and, eating lettuce, like that's not nourishment. We have to focus on nutrient dense nutrition. Our body does not run on thin air. We can't expect our body to be producing adequate hormones and our body to be able to heal our gut lining and our body to be able to have, brain power. Most women are walking around so fatigued and full of brain fog. And it's like, because you're not eating enough, too. It can be simple things. So, nourishment is so key, and that's something we cannot bypass. A lot of people want to dive into the deep end of like going immediately into detoxification processes. So, they may go to a functional doctor, get some labs run. People may be diagnosed with things like parasites or candida, Epstein-Barr virus, and these are very real things. However, having someone dive immediately into a cleanse without addressing all of the physical, emotional, and energetic reasons as to why the body became so hospitable to these overgrowths in the
mm,
first place. You can cleanse all you want, but they're just going to keep coming back. So for me, I was exploring all of the cleanses and all of like the really advanced practices for so long. And my true healing came when I took it back to the basics of, all right, I've been undernourished for literally 30 years. I need to start feeding my body and giving my body the fuel so it can do the job it was actually designed to do, stabilizing my blood sugar, optimizing my circadian biology with things like free sunlight and just getting outside for optimal light exposure, getting enough sleep, right? Like we can't just out supplement the poor foundation. So, foundations is really where it's at for me. That's where I start with absolutely everyone. Nervous system regulation is obviously such a huge conversation that definitely starts within the realm of foundations. That's where I also start to integrate some microdosing with people. Then I start to pursue the opening of drainage pathways with people, which we can explore a little bit more because, again, detox, we have to think of it as like level 10 out of 10 on the healing journey. We can't start there. Detox is something happening within the body, but drainage is all of that junk actually getting out. So if you jump into a detox protocol, but your elimination channels are like sluggish, if you're not pooping every day, if you can't sweat, right? These are big issues. If we're not eliminating the toxins, they're just recirculating. So there is a smart way to go about the root cause healing. This order of operations is essential. And then just so important to reinforce that like 50% of the puzzle is emotional in nature. So
mhm.
we can't bypass these unprocessed emotions or just living out of alignment with our soul's truest essence. I deal with a lot of women with autoimmunity. They come to me with autoimmunity. And aside from the nutrition and the detox, one thing that I really like to make clear is that our immune system knows exactly who we are and it's going to react when you are not being you. So
Right.
it's so much deeper than like just I call basic bitch wellness is what we see a lot on Instagram and like we've got to go deeper. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
here to help people facilitate.
Well, isn't it so interesting too, though? Because even all of the stuff that you're talking about, and I do want to ask more about drainage and parasites. That's something that's
Mhm.
very interesting to me. But in all of the things that you're talking about, if we don't go back to the emotional piece or really diving into all of the things like what we're eating and all of that, like you said, it could be a supplement or it could be a pill, but we're just throwing something at the problem again, and we don't
Yes.
ever really address it. So it just recreates. We
Mhm.
start the cycle all over again. And it's so funny how we like think, oh, we just need to drink more coffee in the day, or we just need, all the things that we would need to get through the day to survive. when it's like, why are we just trying to survive? Why are we not trying to thrive? Is kind of
Yes.
where I would put that. But you mentioned drainage, which I need to know more about that. What do you
Okay.
mean?
So our drainage pathways, they're just our body's natural systems of detoxification and elimination. So our
Okay.
colon, right? Like
Yeah.
we should really be having 1 to 3 healthy full
I've
bowel
heard that about
movements
the
every
3
day.
every day. I'm like,
Yeah, and,
"What?"
like, I mean, most women are actually dealing with hypothyroidism. It can present 20 years before it's even gonna show up on labs, and, again, Western medicine labs, we're being tested for just these normal conventional ranges, which simply means the ranges when you get your labs back and they say your labs are normal, that just means your labs are normal. They fall in the normal ranges among the rest of the population that's being tested. But at this point in time, it's 2025, 94% of the US population is metabolically unwell. So we're being tested against 94% of people who are not
Unwell.
well. So normal
Yeah.
doesn't really mean anything,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of women are dealing with, sluggish thyroid from years of undernourishing. And, that causes a lot of constipation with people. So
Mhm.
first and foremost, like we need to be eliminating in that capacity. But where I see the majority of women struggling in their elimination channels, aside from that piece, is in their liver and in their gallbladder flow and in
Mhm.
their lymphatic system.
Mhm.
So, if those systems aren't operating, those are the systems that can get the toxins out. When we talk about toxins, I also don't want to create fear. We can't avoid 100% of them. We don't want to get in this orthorexic mind frame either, because I've been there and I see that to be just as destructive for
Mhm.
a lot of people, especially women, especially high performing, perfectionistic, type A women, which, that was me for most of my life. We pursue healing and then we get so like rigid around the healing
Yes.
that the stress of that actually is more unhealthy than the toxins themselves.
Right.
So, if our elimination channels are open and if we're just doing our best to avoid as many toxins as possible, we don't have to be, so freaked out and fearful and rigid with them. But the liver is really key. Our liver is an elimination channel. And in addition to being a detox organ, the liver has over 500 other essential vital functions. So, if we are, let's say a lot of women are taking hormonal birth control, that's a huge burden on the liver, and drinking alcohol quite often, and then using toxic makeup products and hair products, and maybe you're cooking your food in Teflon pans, and maybe you burn candles and fragrance in your house and use perfume every day, like right over your neck and thyroid. Every little thing adds up. And when the liver is so overwhelmed with these toxin burdens, it actually doesn't have the capacity to eliminate and metabolize the metabolic waste. So think of things like hormones, right? A lot of women are dealing with issues like estrogen dominance. That's when we see PMS, heavy periods, PMDD can lead to issues like endometriosis. When the body is, busy processing these toxins, it can't metabolize things like estrogen. And then the estrogen just keeps recirculating in the body. And then we have hormonal imbalances. So the different elimination channels are so essential. A lot of people come to me and when we start, doing things that are quite simple, even things like coffee enemas, I know they sound really overwhelming, but I say like coffee enemas really saved my life. I have no exaggeration. I think I was like almost at liver failure because I was so unwell. And our body's wildly regenerative. Like the liver is an organ that it can actually regenerate itself. When we get to the parasite conversation, like parasites are attracted to toxic tissues physically and emotionally. So when the liver is sluggish and it's overwhelmed, it becomes very toxic. Parasites are attracted then to that organ system. The parasites clog up our bile ducts. Then we don't have proper bile flow. We need bile flow to eliminate toxins. We need bile flow to digest fat and protein. If we can't digest those things, we have more gut issues. So the elimination channels, the detox pathways, the drainage pathways that you'll hear me say, they're all the same thing. It's a huge, huge part of the healing puzzle if you're dealing with anything from gut issues, hormone issues, or chronic illness.
That's what I was just thinking for people listening. What does it look like, feel like? Like, how do we know? Is it just that to start paying attention to your body, your cycles? Like, are you not sleeping at night? What are your cravings even? Like, I'm trying to think of what would be one thing you would suggest to people listening as maybe like, "Hey, that's a little bit of a red flag."
Yeah, beautiful question. Because again, we have made so many things normalized, right? So everyone's
Exactly.
like, well, my friends are dealing with that. So what's the big deal?
Yeah.
I do say your period. So women who are in their reproductive years, your menstrual cycle is like your monthly report card. So you can check in, like your period should be pretty symptom free. Like it's normal to have a bit of lower energy during that time, but cramps are not normal. Spotting before your period is not normal. PMS is not normal. Having acne when you like right before your period or during your period, that's not normal. Having
Oh, no.
like diarrhea like during your period, we're conditioned to believe that a lot of these things are normal and they're not. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that's a beautiful starting place. Like just check in to see how we're feeling. I do love tracking my sleep because a lot of people might think like, oh, I'm in bed for, 7 hours, but like, are you actually getting deep restorative sleep?
Mhm.
How's your energy? We should actually wake up and feel energized without
Mhm.
coffee, without needing to rely on, outside stimulants. How's your brain throughout the day? Like, do you have brain fog? Are you anxious? Are you shaky? Are you experiencing fatigue? If you work out, how's your muscle recovery? Like, it's normal to be a little sore after workouts or like feel your muscles. But if you are excessively sore where you can't sit down on the toilet or walk up the stairs, like that's a red flag as well that we're not recovering well enough. But
Mhm.
we can really start with like the simple things. How's our sleep? How's our energy? How's our brain? How's our period? Are we pooping again a few
Mhm.
couple times a day? How do we feel after we eat? Do we get bloated? Do we get gassy? None of those things are actually normal. And a lot of them, you know, overcoming that stuff is really taking it back to the basics.
It's so fascinating. Okay, so let's talk about parasites because I know you
Yes.
say if you have a pulse, you have parasites. And I've done a couple in my lifetime. I think I've done 2 parasite cleanses because I've had them, and I don't know, now that I'm listening to you, I'm like, "Maybe I started in the wrong place." But can you talk through that? Because I know I remember saying to some of my friends, like, "Oh, yeah, I have parasites right now," and they were like, "Ugh," and I'm like, "100% you do too, by the way."
Yes,
So
yes.
how do we get them? What does that look like in your body? What does it make you feel like, and how do we know if we have them?
Well, if you have a pulse, you have a parasite. So every single person listening to this has parasites, and that's not a bad thing or that's not a scary thing. To
Okay.
some degree, some amount of parasite in our body is considered normal. What
Okay.
I'm referring to is parasite overgrowths. So this information, like none of this is new, none of this is trendy, none of this is like new wellness information. Humans, since the dawn of humanity, have been parasite cleansing and deworming themselves. This information was only taken out of our current medical literature within the last 150 years. So when Rockefeller medicine came in, shut down all the herbalism schools, this information was just wiped out. So there's a lot of
Okay.
history that people can go and read about themselves. But there are many other cultures, outside of the United States that still parasite cleanse from the time that children are 1 or 2 years old. And I get DMs all the time from like women in Latin America and other countries, and they're just like, wow, it's wild. You have to spend your energy on Instagram convincing people that this is a real thing. Like,
Right.
doctors will ask you when you go ask them if you think you have parasite issues. Have you been to a third world country? Have you been to a foreign country? This is not just a third world country issues. And do we really think like parasites stay within borders? Like they just know to
Right.
stay with, you know what I mean? So they are in our water system. They're actually in our municipal tap water. Again, this is something people can go look at on their own. But we shouldn't fear parasites once again because we can't avoid them. We get parasites from our food, both plant-based foods and animal foods, from doing really beautiful things like barefoot grounding outside in the soil.
Mm.
That's something you want to do, and that's a way you can also get parasites from our water system, from the air. They can be sexually transmitted. You can get parasites in public restrooms. Like we cannot avoid
Like
them. So what
everywhere. Yeah.
literally everywhere. So a healthy, resilient body should, for the most part, be able to take care of them. Also, if we are cleansing consistently. So our body should be resilient enough to handle the overgrowths, but most people's bodies aren't at this point. And like I said, cultures around the world are parasite cleansing like twice yearly. Like it's just a maintenance. It's just part of maintenance health.
Right.
Um, and I mentioned earlier, parasites are attracted to toxic tissues, both physically and emotionally. So all of the chemicals in our environment, all of the unprocessed emotions and the unresolved traumas stewing in our body. Parasites are very low vibrational beings, and they
Mm.
actually resonate within like fear frequency and unprocessed trauma within the low vibrational frequencies within our body. So I teach parasite cleansing as multi-dimensional parasite cleansing. A lot of it goes so deep. I could take this conversation in a million different directions. I believe parasites are a form of ancestral karmic debts, and it can get very spiritual. But to answer your question of like, how do we know that we have them? Everyone's going to have them. But like some of the most common issues that I see with parasites, well, if you have any chronic dis-ease, right? So if you have autoimmunity, if you have like IBS, if you have PCOS or endometriosis or fertility struggles, there's going to be some type of parasite overgrowth involved there for sure. But even things like we've normalized, like migraines, like bloating, headaches, skin issues, acne, eczema, low energy, because parasites actually will steal your fuel, your food, before you get to assimilate the nutrients
Mhm.
from the food that you're
Okay.
eating.
Yeah.
Sugar cravings, carb cravings. So parasites actually signal to the brain to feed them. So for a lot of people, they're like, I just need better willpower. I'm craving sugar all the time. I can't get rid of these sugar cravings. And I like to tell people, like, you're not going to be able to fight through this with willpower when there are beings inside of your body that are controlling your thoughts, your cravings, your
Mhm.
reactions, your perception of the world. Parasites are not something that are just in your gut either. They reside in every single organ system, tissue, fluid in your body. So they can be in the brain, the lungs, the sinuses. They're in the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, your lymphatic, your bloodstream. So again, shouldn't fear them. There's very easy ways that we can take care of these overgrowths, but awareness is key too. I think, it's the wild, wild west out on like
Yeah.
Instagram and social media, because one platform like TikTok, it's like everyone's talking about parasites. But again, we can't also just go in and like go on these intense killing regimens, because it can be dangerous. Once again, like if your drainage pathways aren't open, or you don't have the foundations or the resourcing within your nervous system first to go through this process. It's intense. And it can also,
Mhm.
when we're killing the bugs, it can stir up a lot of intense
Mhm.
emotions for people, because the bugs hold on to these fear frequencies, right? So when we kill them, we feel the charge of these old unprocessed wounds and emotions. So, I feel like we do need to build a capacity first, physically and emotionally, before we go into these really intense endeavors. But for me, my very first parasite cleansing protocol in 2015 completely healed my endometriosis.
Wow.
100%. It was insane. And the thing with me back then is like, it really helped with endo. It didn't help with everything all at once, but the parasites kept returning. So I was like, okay, I'm feeling better. I'm going through these cleanses, but like I couldn't get rid of the overgrowths.
Mhm.
So that's what really led me to the root cause thinking like, okay, I actually need to also, instead of just killing the parasites, I need to address all the reasons why my body is this like toxic cesspool and is becoming so hospitable to these parasites in the first
Yeah.
place. And I had this wild experience. I don't know if you want me to share this emotional experience.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, because
So
I
this
wanna
is
say this first because you've made this connection in a couple things you said, and I think this is such a beautiful conversation that's starting to happen on a bigger level, but I've always felt like emotions are so tied to what's happening to us physically, and people don't seem to be connecting those dots still. I think it's happening more, but they're so connected. I truly believe that, and so I think
Mhm.
that's what you're about to tie together for us, right?
Absolutely. This
Okay.
is like everybody needs to understand exactly what you just said. It's so true. You could have the perfect diet, 10-step perfect morning routine, do all the biohacks, you could journal every day. But like if you're really not addressing those emotions that are ruling your physiology, it's
Yeah.
emotions are energy. Our body is made of energy. You're going to struggle. We're going to continue to struggle. So The light bulb moment for me, this was many years ago. I was truly in like a dark night of the soul. I was really struggling and I wanted to just lean on one of my trusted energy healers at that time. I didn't pursue a lot of energy healing, but I did trust this woman. So I went to see her and it was just like any other energy healing session. So I thought I was on her table, had some cathartic releases, crying, shaking, finished the session. There was a lot of like cord cutting and I felt a lot lighter. I felt
Mhm.
so much more free. I hugged her. I thanked her. I was like, "Thank you so much. Like that's really what I needed today." All right. So I'm in my car. I had an hour commute back home. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to go to the bathroom so bad. I am not going to make it. Like, I'm not going to make it
Yeah.
home." I did make it home. I go to the bathroom. I look down and there were thousands and thousands and thousands of dead worms in the toilet,
Mhm.
if not tens of thousands, roundworms, liver flukes. And I was just like, oh, I was actually crying in a like because it was like I just discovered something so wild. I wasn't on a parasite cleanse. I wasn't taking any killing herbs whatsoever. Like I just went in for an energy healing session.
Mhm.
I eliminated the frequency in which these parasites were attracted to and then the parasites had no place anymore. And that's what made me, it changed the way I viewed my health. It changed the way I started teaching literally everything. And I've had just way more success with the women that I've been working with in the past 10 years since I had this experience. It's so wild. And I know some people, it might be a little too woo woo and it's okay. Like you don't, it's not going to resonate for everyone at this time. But this is not a unique story. So I was like,
No.
wow, this happened to me. This is crazy. At this point, I've worked with over 15,000 women. I've guided over 15,000 women in reclaiming vibrant health after years of doing it all, trying all the right things. And this story that I just shared happens to the majority of my students. When we address our health from a physical, emotional, and energetic lens, people are having these really wild releases and experiences. And healing conditions we're conditioned to believe don't have cures.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing too, that I love that you tied the energy work into the big release. And like I think this way with cleanses as well. Often the process is like it kind of gets uglier or what we deem as uglier before it gets better. And so like that experience, people might be like, oh, I don't want to do that. But it's like, okay, well, the alternative is that it's like living in your body and sucking the life out of you. Or like sometimes after big energy work like that, I'll have big crying releases, like, after the fact that feel like they came out of nowhere, and now I look at crying as such a different thing. It's like an emotional shower is what I always say,
Mm.
and it's so just like it's a gift because it's a big release, but, like, we have labeled crying as a negative in our society, and so it's like, "Oh gosh, that must have been really bad that you did that energy session because look, you're, like, crying the day after," you know? So I think it's about also shifting kind of some of the, like, things that we've deemed as bad and good in our society and knowing that it's like a part of the process. Like we just want the quick fixes, you know? So there's no process in our life anymore. And I think what you're describing is such a beautiful process of healing that I love hearing about.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell my students, you live in a slow cooker body in a microwave society. We
Yeah.
everyone wants the quick fixes and they do not exist. There's not a magic
Yeah.
pill. There truly isn't. And crying, like you're saying, when we're talking about our drainage pathways, crying is emotional drainage. So it's not
Mm.
just the colon and the liver and the lymphatic system. When we are crying, it's actually releasing chemicals and hormones. So when you're in a really stressful situation and then you just need to cry after to release,
Yeah.
that's actually how your body starts to shed all of the excess stress hormones that
Mhm.
were built up when you were in fight or flight just a little bit prior. It's very, very important. And we were kind of always taught to suppress that as
Yep.
children. When we cry, people are like, shh, 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 no, it's okay.
Don't
Don't
cry, don't
cry.
cry, don't
But
cry.
it's like,
I
no, it's
know.
actually a
Yep.
physiological response to clear all that survival energy. When we don't clear it, it still exists within the body, it builds up, and it creates issues down the road. So crying is beautiful. I love it.
I
I'm
think
glad you
that
said that.
too. Well, it's because I mean, the other thing I notice on, like, reality TV shows, if I'm ever watching these dating shows, one of the big things I notice, especially this is a show I watch is Love Island, and I love the
Oh, I
UK
love
version.
eyeliner.
Yeah, it's so good. But in the UK, I think I have a couple friends from over there, and they say, "We don't do emotions big, you know, or outwardly or whatever." And I've noticed on those shows, when a girl will start crying because she's upset by something that's happening in their relationship, the instinct of everyone around her is, "Do not let him see you cry. Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry." And I'm thinking to myself, "But why? Like, why have we developed this as a weakness?" It's actually the most beautiful, bold, strong thing because we're allowing ourselves to heal in real time. That's how I look at it
Totally.
now, at least.
Yeah, it's spot on. So spot on.
Well, so anyway, let's move on because I know we're running out of time and I really want to talk about psilocybin because I
Yes.
love your approach with it. And I've talked a bunch. My listeners know I did a big psilocybin journey with a shaman like a couple years ago. It changed my life. I did a high dose. So what you have developed is a company called MicroFlow, and it's all about microdosing. And I'm very
Mhm.
curious about this because I know what I did is a little scary to a lot of people, and so even when I'm describing the benefit that it brought to my life and the mass amount of healing, even over time that it's given me, a lot of people are like, "Yeah, but I could never do that because it's scary." Because I was very much in a trip-like state, it's very different.
Mhm.
So, tell me a little bit about Microflow and the company, how it started, and then how you use it in combination with some of this root cause stuff that we've talked about.
Yes, absolutely. So I launched the company MicroFlow in 2022. And as you guys know, I've shared all the things. I've been on this journey for a really long time. And it kind of just seemed that no matter how many things I did, like healed a lot of conditions, but there was still the perfectionism was still really ruling my
Mm,
life. I was still struggling with eating disorders on and off. I knew I needed to nourish my body, but I also wanted to stay a size like double, double, double zero, right? Like there were just these conditions that I couldn't quite seem to overcome. So I started pursuing, first of all, I researched psychedelic healing for probably 7 years before I even tried it myself. Finally, in 2020, I got the ping one day. So it's only been like 5 years, and I'm living in an entirely different reality than I was 5 years ago, but I got the download to start microdosing. I took my first dose, and I had never been able to access, and this is a microdose, I had never been able to access bliss or joy like prior. I'm like,
wow.
"Wow, I've never felt this. Other people feel like this on this planet." It was like the first time where my thoughts weren't consuming my every moment of my reality. It was the first time I felt like my nervous system was able to just exhale and surrender and be present. And yes, just actually hold bliss in my body. And it was so incredible. So, my first 3 months of microdosing, I completely healed a lifelong eating disorder. That's not even why I pursued to start dosing. It just kind of happened in the process. It really, changed my relationships, the way I was able to, well, of course, when I can connect more authentically with myself,
Mm,
I was able to connect more authentically with others, and also just see people for where they are in their journey. I think for so long, like when I would have issues come up in my marriage, the medicine acts like a mirror. So it's showing me like, oh, the issue isn't really with your partner. It's with how you want your partner to show up and stuff. So the medicine was so intelligent. I had all these aha moments, and it really changed the entire blueprint of my nervous system. I feel like my entire life I lived in survival and scarcity, which
mhm.
was even showing in my finances. At that time, I was 6 figures in credit card debt. And I was able to quit my personal training job and take this root cause healing business full time, launched and built a 7 figure business in 1 year with the most like soul aligned people ever. And that's because finally I wasn't afraid to show up as myself. And when I was showing up authentically, I started attracting the right people who were meant for my work. And it just really shifted absolutely everything for me. So for me, I was like, if this can help me, someone who is so health conscious, who's been doing all the things in a matter that was so short, it was like it basically bypassed everything else. I was a breathwork facilitator at the time. I was meditating, doing breathwork every day. Like the psilocybin completely rewired my subconscious in every which way. And I knew I needed to share this medicine with the rest of the world. So I started creating my own medicine, sharing it with like friends and clients at the time. And everyone was having these experiences. So I launched MicroFlow in 2022. Um, I genuinely believe that microflow is the cleanest, purest, most high vibrational microdosing supplements out there. We Everything is organically grown. We are third-party lab tested. We don't use any preservatives or stabilizers. Everything is Reiki infused and just really high frequency and beautiful and very, very intentional. And it's just been completely life-changing for tens of thousands of people. We've had thousands of customers be able to get off pharmaceuticals at this point and just reclaim their fullest essence, their fullest expression in life. So not only is this helping people heal their physical body, it's bringing family units back together. The medicine is wildly intelligent. So if we take it back to what we were just sharing a little bit ago about the emotional side, many people are curious about microdosing psilocybin in general because of the effects it has on mental health and cognition and mood. And those are very, very real. Like there's so many I'd say we pursue like a sparkle. So microdosing doesn't make you high or altered. You can drive, you can work, you can parent, but it just brings this sparkle to your life. However, the medicine is an illuminator. So, in addition to illuminating these really beautiful things of connection and bringing you back to your heart and rewiring your life toward gratitude and just actually starting to recognize all of the beauty and the abundance that already really does exist around us that we ignore all the time, as an illuminator, this medicine is also going to illuminate the shadow.
Mhm.
So, psilocybin does a really beautiful job of making the unconscious conscious, bringing the shadow to light. And again, I know what you just said, it can sound a little scary for people. However, with the microdoses, it happens in micro shifts and it creates this capacity within our nervous system. So, we actually have the capability, the threshold to be with these things. I don't believe that we're given or shown more than we can handle while we're microdosing. So that is beautiful too, because, 97% of our reality is created by our subconscious. A lot of our health issues are created by these subconscious wounds. And when we're saying the word subconscious, that means it is below the level of our conscious awareness. We don't know it exists. So
Mhm.
we cannot heal what we're unaware of. And this medicine kind of just serves it to us on this beautiful silver platter. It's like, here's the stuff that you didn't consciously recognize was happening within, but it's been creating a lot of issues for you. You actually now have the capacity, the medicine gives you the capacity to be with these emotions rather than escaping them like we
Mhm.
typically have done in the past. And in that space, we can come face to face and meet these emotions with love, learn a lesson from them, alchemize them, release them, and we are liberated, right? It's like
Mhm.
this process just gets facilitated so quickly. It's quite wild. But the medicine isn't, of course, a magic pill. We do need to do the work with the medicine. And, it's even more accelerated, of course, when we've got our foundations in check and we're, focusing on our nutrition and our minerals and our blood sugar. But this is such a beautiful starting place for so many people. And when, the whole topic of nervous system dysregulation is really becoming a bit more mainstream, which is wonderful. The psilocybin actually helps rebuild the damage that's been done within our nervous system. It helps us create new neural networks in the brain, in the body, and reconnects all of the parts that had become separated in the past through trauma. So everything starts communicating again. And once again, like, Kelly, you did a macro dose, which
Right.
is incredible for so many people. Now, I tend to deal with people who are more ill and more sensitive. And I like to remind people that an overwhelmed nervous system is very easy to overwhelm. So while macro doses are so wonderful for people like Kelly, for some people, starting there can actually be quite destabilizing because
Hmm.
some people don't actually have the resourcing in the nervous system yet to be able to hold an experience that intense and then to be able to integrate it. So, starting small with microdoses can really help people build that capacity within their system to, heal in real time, integrate in real time. And then, if they do want to pursue a bigger dose down the line, I think microdosing can be a really beautiful starting point. But Kelly's macrodose, I'm assuming, was somewhere between like 3 grams and 5 grams. I'm not sure if
I
you
actually
remember.
don't even know because
Okay.
he mixed up some potion and I just was like, "I'm just going all in. I'm in
Yes.
on this process." Everyone asked me what the dosage was. It was high is all I
Yeah.
know because I had to get up to go to the bathroom at one point. This is a story I always tell people. And I remember walking into my bathroom and the walls were, like, moving, and I was like, "Oh, I'm tripping. I am straight
Uh-huh.
up tripping right now." But it's not this process of, like, you're on drugs in, like, a recreational way. It was
Right.
such an emotionally cathartic experience for me, and I had a very similar thing of you about the bliss piece in that I was brought back to all the love in my heart, and I
Mm,
remembered what I'm here for, which is to love, to give and receive love, and mostly to give. And it just literally, I kept saying, but at the end of it, like, I feel like my heart could explode. I have so much love. Like, it was just like
mm,
love, love that kept just coming to me. But it came with 2 hours before of crying and releasing and
yeah,
going through some harder things. But I think what you said is exactly right. My nervous system probably did have the capacity for that based on the other work that I had been doing.
totally.
However, I had been stuck in a very addictive cycle in relationships, and it was amazing to me. It wasn't overnight, but it was this slow process after that of getting out of situations and then starting relationships and dating again, and I've never in my life had such a different experience, and I mean, I did a lot of work, and I could not have imagined my nervous system having the capacity to handle what I handle now or, like, make the choices I do
Mhm.
without that experience. So it
Yeah.
just kind of brought me out of what I guess it was a rewiring that I couldn't
Full
ex
rewiring.
yeah,
Yes, it's fully
without the help.
rewires your subconscious, and
Mhm,
when you're making those decisions with, not aligned relationships or
mhm.
whatever it may be, that's because we're operating from our trauma body. We're operating from survival.
Yep.
The brain and the nervous system is wired for one thing and one thing only. People don't get this. The nervous system is simply wired for safety, but
Mhm.
safety to the brain and nervous system just means what's familiar, what's
Right.
been repeated in the past. So the microdosing like helps us rewire out of those survival states and we get to choose new pathways. And,
Mhm,
it happens, can happen really quickly with a macro dose, but, with microdosing, it can happen in a matter like with me, 3 months, like my whole world changed.
mhm.
What I wanted to say about the dosing is, those large macro doses. So if you were really tripping, it had to have been at least 3 grams, probably
Yeah,
up to close to 5 grams.
yeah.
The microdosing, we're working with about zero point 0.1 gram per day, about four
Okay.
days a week. So that's about 1/30th to 1/50th of an actual trip dose, just to give some perception to people who might be thinking like that's scary.
Sure.
Most of like I'd say, most of my our customers are working professional people who are
Yeah.
parents and driving children around. So it's not something that's going to produce any form of high or making you altered. It actually just brings you back deeper into a state of presence and wholeness. And it is just so unbelievable. Microflow is also now the blends are for men and women. However,
Okay.
I'm the first company on the market to create cycle syncing microdosing blends for women. So we have a blend that women will use in their follicular and ovulatory phases of their cycle, and then another blend that you can use in your luteal and menstrual phases of your cycle. And it just helps bring you into the different
Mhm,
natural energetic states that we're supposed to experience throughout the course of a month. And it helps us so we are working with the natural energies of our body, then constantly fighting against our body. So that is just such a beautiful aspect is of microflow as well. But I'm so proud of it. And I feel like this is where everything is going right now. We're in
I
the thick of
agree.
this psychedelic revolution. When I launched this company in 2022, I could have never imagined 3 years later that last night I was on live television. I was on the news talking about psilocybin to mainstream audiences. So people are really, waking up to the fact that like we're in the greatest mental health crisis on this
Mhm,
planet. It's not going to be pharmaceuticals and crisis hotlines and safe spaces that are going to save the day. That's not working, right? We have to go deeper, and this is, such a beautiful, healthy, natural, promising solution for so many people. And it's incredibly safe as well.
Well, I saw that Oprah had someone on her podcast last week talking about this, and I was like, "Okay, now that it's definitely going mainstream. If Oprah's talking about it, we're getting to the masses here," and I find it very exciting. The other thing I would say to anyone listening who finds it scary is, like, these practices have also been around forever. If you start researching it, it becomes actually highly disturbing. For me, it did at least, that they got so muted and called illegal and dumbed down and all. I mean, not called illegal. They are, some of it is illegal, but like that to me now I look at it in such a different way because I'm like, oh, it's because it can't make people a lot of money. And I just think it's like we're in this phase too of asking the questions about the bigger corporations, the things we believe. This is a good one to research on your own and make your
Mhm.
own judgments about and assessments and decide what's best for you. Because I know for me, it was one of the most life changing experiences. I believe that's what you're saying as well. So, anyway, and check out MicroFlow because if you want to
Yes,
start small, this is a good, if you don't want to go all in like me, I'm just a big, like, let's just do this. So, the
I feel
macro
you.
was good for me, but I've also been interested in microdosing in the future. So, yeah.
I'll send you a package.
Oh, well, great. You don't have to tell me twice.
I
Well, Christy, thank you so much for being here. I feel like I could talk to you all day, so we may just have to
know.
have you back. Where can people find you? I know we'll put the links for MicroFlow and everything, but where can they find you if they just want to work with you in general or have more questions or just want to follow along on your journey?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me too. Best place to find me, I'm most active on Instagram. So at it's Christy Nault. And then I have another page at microflow.healing. And then my two websites are where you can learn about my programs, my retreats, my work, learn more about microflow. So christynault.com and microflowhealing.com.
Amazing. I'll put that all in the description of this podcast for you guys. Thank you so much for being here. It was so lovely meeting you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Have a great day.